It is. We expected to have another meeting sometime in the January timeframe, and then it took a little bit to get it on the calendar. So Florian came up with this great idea. Hello, everybody. We'll go around the room and introduce ourselves in just a moment. Thank you for joining today as we have our special Valentine's Day session on loving your robot, a special on anthropomorphization, googly eyes, and how people's reactions and how people treat their own robots in terms of, is it family, is it a friend, is it a worker, is it a animal, really affects how you scale your fleet, how you run your fleet, and a whole bunch of different operational considerations. So I'll lead off in terms of introductions real quick, go around the room because I recognize a lot of names, but there's some new names here and some folks who might not know each other. So Joe Wiecek, I am a co-founder of ROG. I am currently the director of technical operations at Outrider, which is a company that essentially is in the outdoor distribution yard automation space. And prior to that, I led the tech ops team at Brain Corp, growing their fleet from 50 to 20-ish thousand, which I think we'll get some more clarity on in a few minutes. I'm going to say whoever goes, call out the next person. So I will send it over to my partner in crime, Florian.
Sorry, I need to admit people as they come in. I'm Florian, and the Joe's worst half, I guess, at ROG. And for anyone who is wondering how to get this wonderful T-shirt that I'm modeling today, you need to come to the next RoboxCon. We had one in November, and I see some familiar faces here who were at the event. When I'm not working on ROG, I work at Inorbit. I'm the co-founder, and we do infrastructure for robot operations.
Yes. And I am also, I think, required to thank Inorbit for being a founding sponsor of ROG, since Florian can't necessarily do that. So sorry, Florian, didn't mean to interrupt. I just realized I forgot to lead that off.
Yeah, that would have been supremely awkward to thank myself. So thanks for thanking me. And then I'll just mention, we very recently opened a space here in Silicon Valley to show off robotics to the world, including random people off the street. So I thought that by way of intro, I'll do something, a little bit of self-promotion, which is, let's see if this works. Just to give you a sense for where we are. So I'm in the back area. If you see that giant blue wall, I'm behind that blue wall right now. This is our community area. We are hoping to host many different organizations. We have plans for women in robotics to meet here, Silicon Valley Robotics. So it's both a demo space, and it's literally going to be open to the public starting next Monday. So back to, I guess, the next person. I'll pick Bernardo.
Thanks, Bernardo. I'm with Romeri Corporation. We've been members of ROG for almost 2 years now. And I'm in business development and being in the industry for a little while, always working with customers in automation and trying to connect robots of all kinds to improve efficiencies at different levels of organizations in warehouses as well as in production environments. I was able to be part of the in-person ROG last year. Loved it, so I do have the shirt. I'll try to remember to model it next time. Join you, Florian, and very happy to be part of this nice group. I'm gonna pass it along to my friend Eugene.
Hi everyone, I'm Eugene Dimitri. I'm the editorial director at Robotics 24/7. I've been covering and attending ROG pretty much since the beginning, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to hear lots of different perspectives. And I'm here with my colleague Cesario.
Hi, yeah, I'm Cesario. I'm the associate at Robotics 24/7. So I work with Eugene, covering the robotics industry. This is my first ROG meeting. So thank you for letting me join in. I was wondering if it was also cool on my end if I record just for my own note taking, if that's okay.
So these are recorded
So
and
Synthetic?
published. Sorry, go ahead,
Yeah.
Florian.
No, I
Oh.
was inquiring. So go ahead.
I was gonna say these are recorded and posted publicly at some point in time, so I don't think there's any problem in doing a separate recording. I don't think you have the Google Meet recording options. I will say that if you want to put anything in writing publicly, just ask whoever has said that quote first to make sure it's get permission on that one.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, because I'm just kind of mostly here just to learn more about the topic and learn more about the robotics industry. So
Perfect.
thanks.
Well, welcome.
You pass it on.
Oh, sorry, I'll pass it on to James.
Hello, I'm James. I'm an SRE at Brain. I used to work for Joe, and I will pass it on to Roman.
Hey, hi. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yeah.
I'm on the phone. Hi, Florian, Joe. It's been a while. Yeah, I'm Roman. I'm working with James, and I used to work with Joe, and it's the same Brain Corp. Yeah. I can
You gotta
barely
call
see
someone,
the
Roman.
next person, but Aldous, right? Yeah.
That's great. Hi, everyone. Good to see many of you familiar faces again since, was it November? I'm Aldous. I'm the founder and CEO of Miley Robots. We're located in Copenhagen, and we do universal fleet management systems. Been a part of ROG for, I think, since the second or third meeting. And yeah, it's good to connect with people. And I'll pass it on to Ellen.
Helen, you're muted.
We are okay. Now, can you hear me? Okay, awesome. So it's been a while since I've joined. So nice to see everyone again. Happy Valentine's Day. And all right. So I have a strong interest in humans and autonomous systems. And I'm writing books about the future of humans and autonomous systems to make the future more cool and less creepy. And I'm writing books. My first one's about creating trustworthy technology. The second is about looking at the world from the vantage point of the machine. And the third is parenting the machine. And I have a background. I'm most known for having started Intel's efforts in automated driving, which is now an almost $2 billion a year business. So I'm now semi-retired and mostly focusing on doing a little speaking and a little consulting and mostly writing the books. And I'm also doing the IEEE standards for governance of AI. So that keeps me busy. So who's next? And I apologize for joining late, but I don't totally know who hasn't spoken yet.
All right. I see Shannon, and forgive me, TU is how you're showing up on Google. There you go.
Hello. Hi. So I can go where others can go.
Go for it, Shannon.
Okay, so I'm Shannon. I'm with a company called Anadrome Robotics, and we're a new startup focusing on robotics that connect autonomous vehicles and diagnostic devices and filtration devices in water resource security and food security. So I'm pretty new to the group. This is my first meeting. It's a pleasure to meet everybody and learn what the group is about and how I can help in any way. So if someone else wants to go next, that's pretty much takes care of me.
Yeah, maybe I can. My turn, right? Thanks, Shannon, and thanks, team. I'm new to this group, and nice to meet you guys. I think we met in November, the ROG meeting, and I'm Thomas. I'm working in a company called High5.net, and we are focused on the networking part, and we're new to robotic field, so I'd love to learn more from the team. Yeah. And our backgrounds is in Wi-Fi, 3GPP. We're developing 5G small cell in building technology. Yeah, thanks.
All right. Well, welcome and good to see you again. And I see someone joined Florian in the office there.
Yes, my name's Tony. I'm a robotics software and operations consultant, as well as a firmware and whatnot developer.
Welcome, Tony. All right, so let's jump into it. Today's theme, discussing. It bridges, I think, the gap of both operations and human robotics interaction. Talking about how actually both your employees and your users, if we want to expand it to that, approach dealing with your robots, approach dealing with how do we interact, how do we name them, how do we number them, how do we work on them, operate them, configure them, send them out into the field, and so lots of different tacks to take here. The fun one, which I do want to save for a little bit closer to the end, is anthropomorphization, or robots becoming more part of what I like to call pets, not cattle. So in terms of fleet management, I don't want to necessarily seed the waters too much, but anyone have any strong opinions or considerations or examples of the considerations you take when running when getting robots out in the field, getting them working, making sure users actually use those robots correctly, or along the lines of how you'd want them used? James.
Yes, Joe, I have very strong feelings.
Oh, I know.
The thing about pet versus cattle is that it applies from cloud computing, where hardware got commodified, right? And that's only useful if you can probably change the number of compute units, right? Otherwise, if you start off with 5 computers in your organization, you with 5 on cloud, there's no reason not to give them names, right? And treat them like pets. It's only if you can scale up and down that matters. And then you've just added the complexity that something has to keep track of those names, which is usually some service discovery thing. I suspect that most robotics hardware is not commodified yet in terms of the profit margin. Like, if it blows up, you don't just go, we'll ship another one overnight to you for free. So that's where I feel like they are pets effectively, right, from the hardware point of view, but from the management point of view, they're cattle, or they should be, which it puts them in an awkward situation. So I don't really I'm not sure what the full implication for that is, but I would be. There's still the industrialization of pet accessories, right? You don't go to a craftsman and get them to handcraft a collar. Florian, you're about to tell me you've handcrafted a collar for your cat.
I was just going to start a tradition here, which is hair splitting with you, James. So
please do. Please do.
Wait, that's not a new tradition, Florian. I think we've been splitting hair since the very beginning.
I think there's a huge difference between applications. When in terms of how people in the space treat robots, if you have 1 or 2, as you said, then yes. If you have 50, they're not individuals, right? They're just, because I like to think of them, they're pack animals, right? It's like, yeah, they're different. They're not completely replaceable, but you kind of don't care. And with a lot of this kind of like robotics as a service, literally, if one breaks, they'll ship you another one the next day. Or if you have a peak of demand, you get 20 more. There's a cost to this, and it's very different from just shutting down a VM instance in at your favorite hyperscaler and starting 100 new ones. So it's not the same. But I think there's situations where they can be treated a little bit more like that. Regardless, I agree with your point that if you have, as in your case, 10,000 out in the field, from your perspective, I'm going to guess that you're not emotionally attached to any one of the 10,000.
I love all of them as if they were my children, obviously. I think that, okay, from an operator's perspective, I do agree with that. But yeah, I'm not attached, but I do understand from the customer's perspective, that's a bit different. It's more for me, the issue of you've got something that's embodied in the public space is what makes the difference, which I haven't really fully formulated my thoughts. But point taken, Florian, about robotics as a service. I saw Joe had his hand up.
Yeah, I actually, so Florian, I don't, pushback's not the right word, but sort of point of clarification is I have seen, you know, on the social media, mostly LinkedIn now, because that's just filled with robotics photos and news now for me. I have seen picking robots have name tags, and I have seen robots that do interact with, call them like warehouse employees, for example. I've seen them be given names, and so I guess to see the question, and I see Gene nodding, so I might call him out on this one. Someone at those companies that are doing these facilities robots that have 50 or 100 at a site have made a determination to give those robots names. And so I'm going to ask Eugene if he has any side here. And I feel like with the books Helen's writing, she might have some insight on this as well.
Yeah, I can start. Oh, you have your mic on? All right. So there is somewhere a Six River Systems robot with my name on it. And so, you know, when you talk about embodied technology or embodied intelligence that is interacting maybe not with the public, but with, you know, floor operators or associates, very much as a matter of morale and acceptance, they're often encouraged to name their robots. Same way you might name a conference room, right? They'll have a contest and people come up with a theme and they name their robots, even though from a management perspective, yeah, those robots are interchangeable and can be scaled and replaced. And so it does depend on how closely humans are interacting with the robots. That if someone is at a picking station, they're seeing the same system every day, they're going to give it a nickname. That's human nature. Now, they may not grow attached to it, but I've spoken to people in the military where they became very attached to their IED, improvised explosive device robots, that they would name them, and that when inevitably those things get blown up, they would want that robot repaired and not just replaced. And so, you know, we think of robots as a tool, and it's certainly a mistake to ascribe too many human qualities. And we try very hard as journalists not to ascribe too many human qualities to machinery. But depending on the role or how closely someone's working with one system or a small subset of systems, they're going to want to personalize it somehow. And you know, people name their cars. There's that relationship with technology that comes up, even though intellectually we all understand it's a device. There's still a lot of it is that morale and retention in warehouses where you want people to think of the robot as an ally and not a replacement.
I think you brought up the IED disposal robot and wanting it to be repaired and not replaced. And I think that's why I tend to want to treat them more along the cattle than the pet side is, especially early on in a robotics company, you're probably going to have some failures. Of course, not anything I've ever worked on, but you're probably going to have some failures early on in the life cycle of getting your robots deployed. And there are going to be times when you want to do a full-on replacement rather than do a potentially repair, because the cost to repair versus the cost to replace is often drastically different. And so, from a fleet operator perspective, I would much rather have everything just have a serial number than have a name. Because if you're at a Walmart and all of a sudden the robot with a name tag has to get taken out behind the woodshed, people are attached to it as opposed to just dropping in a new cash register, for example. And so I wonder, and there's a couple that twofold there is one is, not to get into the robotics jobs conversation, but treating it as a colleague, I think, is very different than treating it as a tool. And since I've joined the robotics industry, I've always treated robots as tools, probably because again, they've never broken, but hypothetically they have broken on me. I don't want to treat it as a person. I want to treat it as something that I can hit with a hammer legally. Florian.
So I have something to comment, but first, in the tradition of introductions, welcome.
Thank you.
Quick intro to the team.
Sure. Yegor, I'm a little bit late, sorry. I'm running a startup called instock.com. We're developing robots for e-commerce fulfillment. It's a subspace called ACRS, Automated Storage and Retrieval System. It's when robots are moving in XYZ in 3 dimensions and bring totes and bins to pickers and back to their storage positions.
Nice. Well, Spencer joined late too, so
yeah, good to see you guys.
Thank you.
Igor, does your ACRS have a name?
I'm sorry?
I said, does your ACRS have a name? Just to make topical.
It's in stock. Yeah, it's same as a company name. We have everything of one. So it's in stock ACRS, in stock robot, in stock. So
nice. That doesn't seem too personal. I feel like that kind of skirts the line nicely.
Right. And from a serial number perspective, even then, early on, there's always the potential of a certain lemon that when someone mentions a serial number of a robot or a vehicle, you're like, oh yeah, I know that one. Lauren, did you have any comments on tools versus colleagues versus hitting things with hammers?
I was actually going to reference someone who gave a wonderful presentation. Let me see if I can project what I'm trying to project. In a self-referential way, in some ways, this is, quoting Cesario here, but who covered this presentation by, and I'm not exactly sure if she pronounced her name, Michael or Michael Taylor from Amazon. And what I found fascinating was, as they were developing their own robots, they actually gave a lot of thought about how they wanted people to think about the robots. And there was this whole discussion about if they look too mechanical, I don't know if that's the word she would use, then people wouldn't expect them to behave, like to move around obstacles, because they have set expectations about it. But if they look too human or too smart, then people would expect them to resolve any kind of situation, which they can't. So I thought that her presentation was really interesting on this kind of like how do you build trust between people and the robots that they are working side by side with. So I just wanted to, I think that was a very conscious and thoughtful approach that they followed. And if anyone knows her, I would love for her to join ROG. So I think she would bring a great perspective here.
So I'm gonna call out Spencer since he joined late. Spencer, have you ever named, because you do a lot more early stage R&D than and then start to scale up. So you're at the very early stage.
Yeah.
Do you how do you have do you name your robots in well, maybe not swearing, but do you name your robots, or do you number them, or do you have how do you approach that, especially early stage R&D?
So the answer is no, but we do number them. So I guess we name them, but with a number. Usually just serial number 1, 2, 3. We have a client who has a 4 count of a $750,000 robot that they deploy, where they've got T1, T2, T3, T4. And to your point earlier, Joe, I thought it was kind of funny because they're like, we don't talk about T3. The other one is cool to talk about, but T3 has a sordid past, or I guess a sordid present. I think a competitor purchased it through channels, and that's where the controversy comes from. So I guess, it's not the same as a puppy where, like if somebody purchased your puppy, it would be kind of weird too. But it is kind of interesting, like the fact that this is a service company and then a robot got procured, and now, that serial number is singled out for scrutiny and being kind of difficult to talk about. I'm trying to think, because we use a lot of acronyms for single serial numbers. We don't even usually give it a serial number if there's only one prototype for a run. I'm thinking of a few of those right now. And then I'm trying to think, like I saw like a really beautiful ACRS actually recently, to Igor's point. And I got to figure out if that thing had a name, because there were 2 identical ones and they were like maybe 4 stories high. I mean, they were really pretty. And I don't think they named them, but they might have. So, I mean, I feel like more often than not, I see robots without names. I did see an Amazon Astro recently, which I know isn't the same as the Amazon Warehouse Robots Forum was talking about, but kind of an interesting example. It was very cute. I feel like I could see somebody getting attached to something like that. But then the name is Astro on every single unit. So that's kind of an interesting workaround. So it's like Mr. Meeseeks from Rick and Morty, where they're all identical and indistinguishable. So, if Astro gets hit by a bus, you just buy another Astro, I guess. I don't know. Maybe not. I'm getting in the mind of people that get too attached. But yeah.
Yeah, because the Starship robots have a face on them, right? And the idea that Starship uses, if I remember correctly, and if I'm attributing this to the wrong company, someone please correct me, is to ask passersby for help when it gets stuck. For example, in snow or sleet. What's that, Spencer?
I said that's interesting, just playing on people's sympathies by having a face. Like that's kind of a clever tactic, actually.
But this is where it's, good intentions, path to hell is paved with good intentions, where you've seen on college campuses, because that's a big part of their strategy right now, as far as I've gathered. College kids in the middle of the night aren't necessarily inclined to be the most nicest to these cool things that are going out there. Similar to how, Cruise is publishing videos of people jumping out in front of their AVs.
Oh, geez.
People are going to mess with cool new technology, because cool new technology is always something people are drawn to and want to mess with, or just observe. But there's always a percentage of the population that will mess with that technology. So I'm wondering if anyone has done actual studies to say, is this helpful? Is it harmful? Do people treat robots better? Are there studies on this? Do people treat robots better if they have some sort of, this is a partner, or this is a colleague, or this is a friend, or this is something that is anthropomorphic, as opposed to just, here's a something that looks like a, it's a tool. Aldous and then Helen.
I actually have been following a bit on that Starship story that you mentioned. And yes, there's a lot of studies that have come out on this Starship. There's a lot of the newspaper articles regarding it, and this how the robot has been adopted as a member of the community and not just another vehicle. What does really annoy me is I cannot find the research paper from the 70s about human and robot interaction and emotions and why we're putting faces on some of these what's it called, humanoid robots to give it more of a human appearance, such as the Pepper or other. But I just want to throw in that no, you're not crazy. That is actually a lot of people have been seeing these robots as more members of the community or members of the family or workforce than just being a tool or a cattle, as has been said before.
Helen?
Yeah, no, I think there has been quite a bit of work done in this area, and it even goes before robots per se. I mean, even if you look at the front of an automobile, it has face-like characteristics with the headlights and the way the grills are done, and it's usually done in a positive kind of almost like a smiling type look to it. And there have been studies that look at the relationship and acceptance and adoption, and more on the cool spectrum than the creepy spectrum, because there's also fear of robots. Okay, so if you're looking at adoption and especially with the public, kind of a positive robophilic reaction versus a robophobic reaction, I think that there's relevance there. And I think that there's some interesting things that have been done. So NASA did interesting things with naming the Mars rovers. And if you haven't, I would highly recommend watching Goodnight Opie. Okay. I would definitely do that. And what is also interesting to me is the parental and the maternal feelings people have towards the robots, almost robots like their children. And that really came out in Goodnight Opie, okay, in actually a fairly big way. There was actually, deep mourning going on with the death of one of the robots. And what was interesting is it was not just the team of people that developed the robot, tested the robot, launched the robot, programmed the robot. It was the general public had a sense of mourning and connection to, opportunity and curiosity and perseverance and all of those. So I think that there's some really interesting relationship questions, and I think it's evolving over time, but it's also partially informed by a century of science fiction. So science fiction, for better or for worse, has influenced public perception of what robots are, how robots, behave, and the trust versus the mistrust or the distrust is really important. And then back to the idea of the model numbers, if you go back to Star Wars, you had R2-D2 or C-3PO. Okay, so those are not names per se, but they became names. Okay, so, it's the whole space is very fascinating. And one of the things that was interesting about working at Intel is we had user experience people, and we would work with psychologists or psychiatrists about how the technology would be used or potentially misused. And the whole area is just fascinating.
Thanks, Helen. I'll look up that movie when I get a chance.
Oh, it's a must watch. Okay, but have a box of Kleenex. I'm serious. Okay.
So
Even-
don't watch it on an airplane, is what you're saying.
No, so it's a documentary, but you need the box of Kleenex. I'm like, wow. Okay, so that really takes it to the level of connection with a robot.
Nice. Shannon. Oh.
Hello. So I was just going to mention a couple of things in passing because we're talking about kind of the persona of one entity, you know, the robot itself, and kind of the status of that entity in community. But if we were to humanize our robots, the closest thing might be to elevate them into a position of doctors. And because the environment in which they're working has to do with the ecosystem, it also elevates the persona of that ecosystem into more of an organism, almost like a patient. And that's something we haven't talked about this morning. So not just the idea of robot as a human identity, but considering the space and the environment in which they're performing in or performing on also changes. That relationship also changes. So that's my consideration there.
No, that's fascinating. And I guess I hadn't quite thought about it like that before. Florian.
I think there's the psychology of it, as Helen was saying, is really interesting. There's also the, you know, careful what you wish for type of situation. So there are robots that operate in public spaces that are designed to be huge, right, to some extent. And then they have little kids hugging the robots. Now, if you get that on camera, the marketing people are going to love it. The roboticists, not so much. They're like, why are these small human creatures mislocalizing my robot and smearing their dirty hands on my sensors? So I think there's, you know, it's a fine line, and I think it's hard to meet all of the requirements at once, as in most engineering situations.
Right. You know, I'm thinking about the warehouse as an organism now, because you know, you think about one or two robots. I don't think make a drastic change in how someone approaches an environment, but all of a sudden you have an automated system. Look at you know, there was a video circulating on LinkedIn I saw with Geek Plus, a pick and pack system, and it's humans are on this side and the robots are on that side. I know that's a very common thing in terms of safety and functional safety in these environments. But I'm wondering, and I have no frame of reference here, if that's your working environment every day, how does that change your opinions on autonomy or change your opinions on the environment in which you work? Does your building now have a certain higher level of being alive than if you were just in a warehouse populated by people operating manually operated forklifts all day long?
I can speak for warehouses.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, for sure, the people who sit in rooms that manage warehouses, they of course tend to think more about warehouse as a living organism, and so it can behave well and not well, be out of order, or be kind of fully operational and working well. Those people who are in warehouses, you're right that there are two types of robotics there. The one where you do have perimeter and the robots and people are not intermingled, but the interfaces between them are clearly defined. And then there is a second one where robots and people are intermingled, right? So it's a more open environment. So in the first case, I think it's kind of a lot of anxiety among people that if in the zone where robots operate. If it goes down, then people need to do special operations. So basically, all shift is cheering for none of the robot or nothing bad to happen in that zone that they kind of not less in control of. When robots and people are intermingled, then there is a different type of anxiety, that robots are in a way and they're very often slow, and you can slow them down by kind of walking in front of them. So kind of two different perspectives: people who are sitting in a room trying to control all of the warehouse, and then people who are on the floor. They kind of think less about the totality and more about the current robot that is in front of them.
Interesting. So I want to start. We got 15 minutes left. I want to save the last 5 for announcements. But I do want to kind of circle back on cattle versus pets to wrap up, because I want to parlay it into the conversation about googly eyes, which is I think there's a. I think even in this room, I think we all have different points of view here. You know, James had mentioned, and I'm familiar with his line of thinking in terms of wanting to treat that more as cattle. You know, when you worry about fleet monitoring, metrics, configuration management, software updates, you really don't, unless there's some very specific things you're looking for in a given new feature or a given release. You essentially want to see how your fleet's going to react and ensure that for a subset of that fleet based on, or farm, Florian, a subset of that fleet, you want to make sure that you're targeting specific KPIs. And so it naturally has to become unified in terms of minimizing that kind of individualism. However, from a on the ground operator, you want to make sure that robot has as much care and feeding, if you will, from the end users. And so then giving it a name or giving it googly eyes might help. I personally hate googly eyes. There's my strong opinion. And the reason is, I want people like, and so my use case has always been taking an existing piece of industrial equipment and automating it. So it still has a seat, it still has a steering wheel. And I want people to let it go and do its job and not mess with it, because my autonomy always functions better when there's people just kind of standing by and watching it do its thing, as opposed to interacting with it. And I think that those googly eyes invite interaction, and interaction makes autonomy harder. Florian.
So I think we've been gravitating towards what I would call working robots. There's a whole other space of, you know, social companion robots, embodied, for example, as a robot designed to help, you know, provide companionships and skills to children with autism. And there, the face, the simulated face is definitely a feature, not a bug. I think in terms of working robots, I started a trend that exactly one person is following so far, which is, you know, I was thinking about the pets and cattle, and they seem too far apart. And, you know, I think of pets as, you know, they're around the house, they sit on your couch. So it's a very close connection. And cattle, you know, they're anonymous and they're, you know, meant for the abattoir. But I think there's something in between, which is a farm. And while I didn't grow up in a farm, so I can't really speak from direct experience, from talking to people, the relationship that people have with the animals in the farm is somewhere in between, right? So sometimes they do have names, but you don't want to get too attached to them, because you know Hamlet may become breakfast, you know, soon. Hamlet, by the way, is my favorite name for a pig. But they're supposed to do work, right? They're there to do a job, and if they're not doing their job, then they require some sort of corrective action. so I don't know. I think that's the way I think about it, and it kind of straddles the in the googly eyes analogy. They need to be. You need to know what they're up to, right? So I think there's a value of robots signaling in a way that a human can understand. This is where I'm going, and it could be a turn signal, or it could be a hand, or it could be eyes looking left or right. I think all of those to me are valid. If it's just for decoration, it may still be valid if it means people are less likely to, smear ketchup on them. So I think if we think of it as a tool, as opposed to I don't know, like a marketing gambit, I think there's some value in maybe not humanizing, but giving them a little bit of, like some affordances as a human. How do I relate with this thing? I think Helen is next.
Yeah, Helen, and then Eugene, and then I think we'll be about time to make some announcements and wrap up.
Okay, so I think there's a really, really important elephant in the room that needs to be, just at least mentioned. And then because I think it kind of, it has a direct reflection on what we're doing here. And that is people's concerns about automation and robotics taking their jobs. Okay. So there is some intrinsic fear with people that are working with robots. Are the robots taking over? How is my livelihood going to be affected, going forward? And so I think there's some of it comes from science fiction, but some of it is a very real, visceral feeling that people are having towards some of the robots. Okay. Not towards something like a Roomba that's just going around and you've delegated a task and it's doing something you don't really like to do. And so that's okay. And watching cat videos of Roombas, also okay. But because people have a foreboding about robotics, making them as personable or making them as relatable or making them as non-threatening, is actually hugely important. Oh, that's my 2 cents.
I appreciate that, Helen. We often skirt around the robots taking jobs conversation here, because I think we all have our jobs because of robotics, and we know that it will create jobs. However, there is definitely a shift of efforts when you talk about automation and robotics. Eugene, I think you've got last say before we wrap it up, unless I can double down on hating googly eyes after you go.
I'll speak quickly. So to go back to Florian's point, my wife grew up on a dairy farm. They named all their cattle and then they ate them. So, it's not humans. The closer you are to something, the better there's a chance of understanding its actual function. And then to Helen's point, form factor is really important when designing or deploying robots. So it's noteworthy that almost all service robots are shorter than an adult human. Most of them are white, look like they popped out of an Apple store. There's definitely Pepper's the most obvious one, but there's a lot of robots in that direction. And so if you're deploying a lot of robots that people are interacting with in a warehouse, in a factory, on the street, you'll see those rounded edges. You'll see some of that, and that's not just for safety; it's also to be non-threatening. And then we touched on anthropomorphism. That's going to be even more common when and if general purpose humanoids occur. And obviously Tesla is working hard on that, as are a couple of others. Boston Dynamics has made a lot of YouTube hits by showing dancing, somersaulting, jumping robots. When and if those models ever become commercialized, they'll have to deal with that on a whole other level. And even the ones that don't look humanoid but are bipedal or have, a roughly humanoid torso, we're starting to see more of those. They're going to have to figure out where does that fit in and how should humans interact with them. And so, this question is by no means resolved.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see over the next couple of years as autonomy improves and we figure out how to get better and better at having autonomous systems in the general public and around the general public, to see how this area of HRI and design and incorporating into the real world starts to really take hold. And we're going to have some examples of successes and failures, and everything's going to have some really interesting case studies after the fact. So I hope companies that are getting closer and closer to the general public speak more about it and share lessons learned of that kind of swing of more humanistic, more humanoid, less humanoid design principles, and how that all takes place. Going to be an interesting couple of years. All right. On that note, 5 minutes left. Just a couple of quick housekeeping announcements. Of course, for our future meetings, if you're in Mountain View, In-Orbit is graciously hosting in-person events there, as well as other events hosting other robotics industry associations and groups. So I'll let Florian speak to that in just a moment. And again, thank In-Orbit for their founding sponsorship for ROG. And finally, our next session, we actually already have it scheduled. I just need to make the announcement. On March 28th, it will be more of part of a lecture series than a roundtable. We'll have Ruben Scriven, who is an industry analyst, come and talk about the state of warehouse automation. And so that'll be 8 a.m. Pacific on March 28th, and the announcements will go out this week. Florian, any last thoughts?
I just wanted to go around the room and, the traditional, are you hiring? Are you looking to be hired? If you have anything interesting to share, even if it's not related to the topic that we just covered.
Right. I'll start then. Outrider is hiring, not for my team right now, but in general, we are hiring robotics talent. So go outrider.ai/careers to see our list of openings.
Brain is also hiring. It's not on my team either, but go to the careers page there.
Wonderful. And I know we're all aware of the layoffs that have been happening in tech. So maybe an ask for everyone to be on the lookout to try and help make connections for people who have been laid off. I would say especially for people who are on a visa and in many cases have fewer than 60 days to leave the country. So if you're able to, if your company is able to be on the lookout, and if not, just help make connections with others who might. I think it's a future. Yeah, go ahead, Spencer.
I was gonna say, if anyone here has need of a really good perception engineer who is currently a lead at a company that's hurting pretty bad right now, reach out to me on LinkedIn and I'll make an intro. So yeah, happy to help. Visa, so could use it.
Excellent. I think it's actually, for robotics companies, it's maybe once in a generation opportunity to hire amazing talent from companies that normally, it would be very hard to compete for that talent. And right now they're available. So I hope more connections will be made. And I'll extend the offer again with our public space here, putting on my Norb hat. I actually have an Orbit hat that I need to bring to these meetings for this purpose. This space, again, we want to use it to help really educate people on the role of robotics in everyday life. So even if you're not coming to one of the meetings and you want to, bring a significant other, a child, a grandchild, and have them see what robots are like. Our goal is to make robotics less threatening, or at least, have people more informed about what it actually means. Because my experience with robots was that you know, they were shaped by science fiction, like Helen was saying. And when I found, you know, started interacting with real robots, it was so much cooler in some ways, but also supremely underwhelming, right? Because they just kind of, you know, an AMR goes from point A to point B. So I think it helps to actually see things in real life.
All right. Thank you, Florian. Any last thoughts before we wrap up? Everybody, thank you so much. We'll see you in March.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.